You can.
There it is. Right, well, hi everyone. I'm Max, Senior Backend Engineer on the compliance team, and I'm with Austin, our product designer. And this is mainly for my benefit more than anything else, because I've not spent any time working with the compliance dashboard, compliance report since I started at GitLab. So I kind of wanted to have just a pretty brief conversation about like what it is from a complete beginner's point of view, and then what we see the differences between what we have today and what the desired outcome from this issue would be. So yeah, take it away, Austin.
All great questions. Yeah, absolutely. So in like the end of 2020, going into 2021, we were doing some research on validating the next iteration of the compliance dashboard to make it more useful. And I'm going to share just a link and dovetail to, I wrote up a summary kind of talking through those findings and what we explicitly learned from the users that tested the compliance dashboard and looking into different UI changes and why we would want to make those. So that all basically informed how we're going to evolve into this. But taking a step back, looking at the compliance dashboard as it is today, there are a couple of things that stood out as not useful for users. Primarily, you only see the most recent merge requests. So that already masks a lot of very important data. There could have been hundreds of essentially compliance violations, but we're only seeing the most recent one. So it really makes it hard to really dig into things and evaluate them. So that's the first biggest thing.
Just to sort of clarify there, so this is a group level dashboard. So
it's a group level dashboard. Yep.
Great. So let's take GitLab, for example. There's dozens, hundreds, probably thousands of projects where merge requests are regularly used. And for each project, you'd see the most recent merge request or across the whole group?
Right now, it's showing you the most recent merge request for each project in that group. I think it includes subgroups. I'm not positive.
That would make sense.
Think about it, but I think it does. So this is a project GitLab shell. This is a project GitLab test. And we're only seeing the most recent one. So even for GitLab org ourselves, there would be potentially thousands listed here. And it's only looking for ones that merge into, I believe, the default branch. So in our case, it's master, at least in my local environment. Might be main some other places. So it does have some parameters around what's displayed here. We won't care if someone pushes it to their own branch. Break all the rules you want.
For sure.
So that's the first thing. Second thing is when you start trying to better understand what's not compliant about this, it requires a lot of effort. So this one tells you that there's at least one rule that doesn't adhere to separation of duties. Okay, what rule? We define those rules in our docs, which is great. There's 3 rules we check. So then it basically requires you to open documentation, look at it, and then look in the MR and look for, did it pass the first rule? Yeah. Did it pass the second rule? Yeah. Oh, it failed the third rule. Okay, cool. So we want to give some more feedback to users around that so they better understand the usefulness of these merge request violations as they are. So those are like primarily the main detriments to the current view. A number of people also communicated that this isn't a dashboard. There's no metrics, there's no like aggregation of charts. So one particular participant communicated a really great point. They're like, I would love to just see like over time, my number of merge requests that had not done separation of duties properly. So am I having more approval status violations over time, or are they going down? I want to know over time, are we getting better at compliance, or are we still being the worst? So there are definitely some ways that we could.
Sorry, so the value in the feedback you've been getting is that a continuous process of improvement is more important than a single failure being a huge, blocker for everything.
It's both. So they're saying a dashboard to me means I can see trends over time. This is like a report to me. This is more of a aggregate display of explicit violations. That's kind of where the name compliance report is coming from. Probably will continue to emerge. I would really love to see us use less of the word compliance as a prefix to things and be more descriptive. So a great example of this is the security team calls it a vulnerability report. It's telling you about vulnerabilities. I mean, this to me is more of a merge request, like violations report, but we'll see if that continues to resonate in the future.
I agree. And I mean, slightly off topic, but I think things like custom compliance frameworks also fall into that bracket because, you know, you can have plenty of frameworks for the governance of projects or organizations that aren't strictly compliant. But perhaps a conversation for another day.
Yeah, it'd be a great coffee chat topic for sure. So anyways, that's kind of just like a base overview of where we kind of stand with this. Running users through some basic tasks, it was kind of clear that they couldn't really accomplish what they were looking for. So that was useful to know. And so through several iterations, or I should rather say several ideations, because we didn't actually iterate, we didn't release anything. We came up with this idea to break down each merge request into individual violations. That way, you can really hone in on what the problem is. So instead of only seeing for that one merge request, a fixed Gitly Ruby not starting on test, in our current dashboard, you would only see one as long as it's the most recent merge request. Now you're seeing, okay, it didn't, it had an author approve its own merge request. It had committers approve its own merge request. Those are what we consider high violations. So we're introducing also this concept of severity. So participants communicated they didn't understand which of these is more problematic. Which should I go after first? I don't know. So we're using our best guess, honestly, around the priority level of these severities. So it's kind of like a first pass. But this would better help a compliance manager start actually taking action on these things. Several participants communicated that they also are already kind of creating this report on their own. So they're identifying all the merge requests that didn't do the right things, putting them like in an Excel sheet or something, and then presenting that to their VPs to kind of highlight areas of improvement and then how they've addressed it. This would kind of give them a way to not have to do that. So giving them direct access to all the important information, and then this thing you keep seeing fly out from the right is a drawer that gives you more high-level details of your merge request. So it would be kind of annoying to have to click into the merge request just to sift around and find specific bits of information. So we're trying to bring what's most pertinent to the compliance manager into this report so they don't have to leave necessarily. And this allows them to look up allows them to look up some specifics. So instead of having to dig in and find out who are the people that were like commenting on the issue or on the merge request, they can find it faster, just to help keep them in the compliance report and jumping around, because they're going to have to probably mitigate numerous ones. So it's really just trying to reskin the data for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the rules themselves and their severities, are those things that, at least in this ideation, would be something that we define as GitLab, which would be essentially enforced upon users, or is this more customizable?
Yeah, this would be something that we would be opinionated on from GitLab's perspective.
Cool.
Matt and I kind of went back and forth on a couple of these, but this is kind of what we're thinking. So it's not completely uninformed. Some of this was expressed by participants talking about percentage of code coverage they look for, percentage drops, and we're thinking that things like separation of duties probably is higher than code coverage drops for the most part. So, and this is totally malleable. Like, we might find out that customers really think pipelines are most important, and maybe that becomes a critical severity. We have ideas for other ones in the future. I don't remember if it's here. Maybe it's might be at the epic level. Yeah. So we had some ideas for additional violations that could come in the future. So
are we talking as well? Are we thinking end game as well, like later down the line, that maybe like those individual percentages and that kind of thing would be editable by compliance managers? So, you know, a drop of 5% is medium and a drop of 50% is a critical
It could be. I think who I would probably lean on getting some more feedback from would be the security team, since they've been doing a severity rating on the vulnerability report.
Oh, of course, yeah,
And
that's true.
I think they might have some experience with customer feedback and feeling opinionated on whether or not something is high or medium.
Sure.
But yeah, this is definitely a first stab at it. And I would not be surprised to find out that there are people with strong opinions on whether or not having less than 2 approvals is a flag.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is kind of why we're saying this is what we feel as GitLab are like merge request violations. Just because you have less than 2 approvers doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but we just want to say like, this isn't probably best for your environment. If you don't care about compliance, don't look at the compliance report.
Well, quite, yeah.
Yeah, because we're not impacting the merge requests at all.
Okay, that was my next question. So it shows up in a report and it would, be flagged up, although not in a push kind of way, to a compliance manager. It's not going to stop anything. It's, if you're breaking these rules, you're not blocking merge requests or anything like that. It is simply a reskinning of the data, essentially.
Yep, exactly. And that's how I framed like the whole epic, is to try and say like, we're trying to make this into more of an insightful report to reduce the amount of like overhead required to dig into this information.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, the next thing I need to do then is to have a look at the existing system and figure out, I'm still not clear in my head whether those violations are stored in our database or whether they are figured out on the fly. That's a question for me. I can figure that out. But it's just certain things we need to think about. I suspect they're generated as and when required, based on what I can see here. Don't know whether that will be sufficient if we're displaying considerably more data per project. Potentially an unlimited number of violations per merge request. Oh no, per project, not per project, not per merge request. Question for me, but just something I wanted to vocalize out loud.
That's good feedback, and I realize that it can be a really big headache on the back end to like handle loads and loads of data that's just being presented differently in GitLab. One thing that participants did really specify as important was being able to filter down data. So since there's going to be such a volume, especially if you think about how GitLab runs it today, being able to go from like all projects down to something specific. And even if that means like we don't allow all projects, I think that's also totally an option. Like if we say like you have to specify a project in order to load the report, I hear that. We don't want to just have it sit and spin for minutes, not ever pulling something back.
Yeah, I'm going to have a look into our GraphQL API and see what can already be done. I suspect a fair amount can already be figured out via an API, in which case we may be able to lean quite heavily on the front end rather than the back end. This is all speculation at this point because I just don't know. But in terms of filtering, we've got some constraints on audit events in terms of you can only filter a maximum of 30 days. But that's purely down to the fact that we're talking about such a large table. And the same may not be a case here. We may have to enforce pagination potentially. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, it has to be paginated. It has to be paginated.
Yeah.
That's what it kind of boils down to.
Yeah, I would obviously prefer it wasn't, or some sort of infinite scrolling. But yeah,
infinite scrolling has its own problems too, because to get to data that's farther down, you can't jump to it. You have to keep hitting scroll, and that can sometimes be frustrating.
There's issue for accessibility as well. In fact, I don't think there's any examples in GitLab of where we do that. Is there? Thinking about it,
I think in your activity, it's infinite scrolling.
Good point.
Okay, which kind of makes sense. Infinite scrolling works very well for social media, where like the whole goal is to keep you scrolling.
Yeah, I guess so. We're not really trying to do that. If you're infinite scrolling your list of compliance violations, then there's probably bigger problems at play here. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, in which case, I don't think I've got any more questions. This was really, really helpful because I now have about 1,000% more context into what it is we're trying to achieve. So my next job will be to get back into the Epic and start breaking down any backend stuff that needs to be done, trying to understand better what we can already do and how far away from that we are today. And then we can begin to break it down.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Because Matt was absent when I was going through finishing solution validation, my initial stab at most of these were my best guess at implementation issues that I assumed would probably need to be broken down further. Like I just said, hey, let's make a drawer for the compliance report. And I can totally imagine that this drawer is going to then be broken down into more implementation issues. Totally fine. So if something's not there, it's more due probably to my negligence than anything else. So
That's fine.
assume that it's necessary.
Yeah, I think the biggest back-end thing we're going to need to think about is how we represent violations, because at the moment we're not really showing a violation in the front end. We're showing a merge request and a bunch of information about that merge request. We're going to have to store information about what we define as a violation, and that's going to be the biggest job. But once we've done that, then it becomes a case of making sure those models store the correct information, and then we display it. But that's fine. That's what we do. So yeah, there's nothing. It doesn't sound like there's anything massively unusual about this.
Cool. Well, love to hear it. Making some more GitLab magic. That's what I'd say.
Right, I'm just making a note of that. I'll just stop the recording.